Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming to this event this evening. This is an exciting thing that has been being worked on for quite some time. And so we're really excited about being able to provide you not only with an overview of what have brought us to this day, but also some of the recommendations that have been brought forward that we're really looking forward to implementing within our Missoula marketplace for parking purposes. Tonight we have a very special guest with us, and I will tell you from a personal standpoint, I like his innovation. I like the way that he has a very thorough look at parking. I like the way that he considers everybody's perspective in his decision-making process. The way that he brings in ideas from other areas or from other communities that he's seen work, as well as bring some ideas and say, you know what, this one doesn't quite work. So I think that you'll find that this open collaborative conversation this evening is going to be very worthwhile for everyone, and that Dennis is one of those individuals that takes any question that you might have, and he will share with you the information that he has to provide back. So that's going to be exciting for us this evening. On your chairs, you're going to find a blue response sheet. In the second part of our program this evening, it's going to be broken down into 3 sections. The first section is really an overview of the first 2 phases as to what brought us here this evening, and Dennis will go into those areas. The second aspect will be recommendations. There's 9 different recommendations that Dennis will go through one by one. And then the third section will really be that open conversation where we can get into some discussion and some conversation about what is it, how would it work, how would it apply to Missoula, what might it mean to us now, and what might it mean to us in the future. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Mr. Burns this evening. He is a senior practice developer and regional vice president for Kimley Horn and Associates, which is a national planning, engineering, and consulting firm. He has over 28 years of experience dealing with parking. And I will say, for some of us who've only been dealing with parking for a short period of time, I honor anyone who deals with parking for 28 years. In the past 5 years, he's really focused on municipal parking programs and business district development, really bringing forward the ability to utilize parking not only from a system organizational aspect, but also from an economic development aspect. So I think you're going to hear some really neat, innovative ideas and some conversation that really will lean into our economic development opportunities as well. This is part of our master planning process, and really is meant to integrate with that master planning process. And I know that Dennis will share a little bit more about that and how all that comes together as we continue here. One of the things that I want to point out that is his area of special expertise, not only the parking master planning process, but really the entire community strategic planning and how parking fits in. And I think that that's important when you think about all the different individuals in our community and all the different things that we're trying to accomplish in Missoula, and everybody that we are really trying to not only make Missoula their home, but also make it an area in which we can have a good community conversation, and good community movement into our future. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dennis Burns.
Thank you very much. It's exhausting just hearing all that. I'm wondering why I don't have more gray hair. What we're going to talk about tonight, I think Colleen outlined it very well. We need to go back a little bit. How many people were here throughout the entire downtown master planning process? How many people weren't here through some of that? Just a few of you? Okay, well, some of this will be repeat. If it's repeat, we'll go fast through it. If I go too fast and you want me to slow down, just raise your hand and we'll do that. If there's something that absolutely grabs your attention and you really want to stop, just raise your hand. We'll try to make this as conversational as possible. Our assignment, this was really interesting actually. It doesn't happen all that often that a parking plan gets fully integrated into a downtown master plan, and that was something special here for us. Our engagement, basically, we decided to break our study dimensions into 3 task reports. The first task report was a look at parking supply demand, kind of getting that real baseline data that we needed to understand things. We broke the downtown into 5 analysis zones, as you see there. Move on to the next slide. We did it on a block-by-block basis. So you've got data to go back and actually zero in on any particular area and really get some good information on a block-by-block basis or on a zone basis. But you've got a lot of flexibility in the data that you've got. It's a lot of interesting data here. In terms of overall parking spaces, about 5,700. That includes public and private. But again, we're not going to dive into the totals here unless anybody has any real interest. Your off-street inventory was about what? 3,981 spaces, and your on-street inventory was about 1,789 spaces, and it's broken, as you can see, down by area. So lots of detail, lots of analysis into each area. This kind of tells you sort of by zone what the breakdown was in terms of inventory versus utilized spaces versus vacant spaces. And I guess you can see from this slide that your inventory was 3,981 for, what is this? Must be off-street spaces. And the utilization was only 2,500. So quite a bit of available spaces. And that kind of plays back into the idea, do we have enough parking? There's a perception we don't have enough parking. The reality is you do. But sometimes it's not always in the right places. So it's fairly common that we have some hotspot areas. This looks at utilization of those spaces. Your peak period was between around 2 p.m. or noontime. But peak demand for on-street was 75% and off-street was around 66%. So you do have quite a bit of available parking. The other dimension of task report number 1 was a current parking program assessment. We looked at kind of the overview of your program, the things that you were involved in as a parking commission, the residential permit programs, your off-street facilities, your on-street facilities. We looked at your programs and your rates, your parking enforcement program, your management structure, your organizational structure, your operating budget, your transportation alternatives support, your marketing and branding component. And we were really quite impressed, actually. I think we've got a really, really good program here, and I think you should be proud of the program you've got here. You've got a really, really strong program on which to build. I was asked to write a chapter in a book that was published by the International Downtown Association called Making Business Districts Work. So I scratched my head for about 6 months figuring out what to write, and ended up coming up with these 20 characteristics of effective parking programs. And we kind of use that as the basis of our program analysis. I was supposed to insert here a whole list of your strengths, but I never got around to doing that. But suffice it to say that your list of strengths were much longer than the weaknesses that we had to report on. But a very impressive program overall, and we're very pleased to say that. Oftentimes, we're not quite so complimentary, I have to be honest. One of the second task report, after we had done all the analysis that we just went through, the Crandall Arambula team, the downtown master planning team out of Portland, through a bunch of public process, ended up with one of their central elements of their master plan was a retail hotspot concept. Everybody remember that? Familiar with that? Well, one of the things that we focused on as part of our second task report was looking at what that retail hotspot area meant, what the future parking needs would be, specifically in that area and in other areas. And we ended up deciding that this is a really unique opportunity. If this was going to be a central element of your downtown master plan, we decided to create a comprehensive parking retail support strategy to go along with that retail hotspot concept. And so that was a lot of what was in task report number 2. You probably remember some of these diagrams from the area. One of the major recommendations that came out of there was a parking structure to be built on the corner of Front and Patty. That project is still alive and actually moving forward. We think it's a great site. We've heard some comments in the last few days about, is that still going to happen with Macy's deciding to leave town? Well, absolutely. We think it's still a very valid site for a parking structure. We want to see something happen with that Macy's building. We'd love to see that building rehabilitated and preserved, and a really great opportunity come into there. Who knows what it could be? It could be a lot of exciting things. There's also another development opportunity on the adjacent block there. But the other thing we really liked about this site was it's going to be able to serve the First Interstate Bank and that block where Macy's is very effectively, but it's close enough to the river to serve the river on the weekends. It's also close enough to the cultural district. to support events down there in the evening. So it's got a great shared parking potential for that site. So there's a lot of reasons why that site is still a very good site to develop, and then we're thrilled that that is moving forward. You know, you've had a lot of bad news recently economically. It's been kind of a, one hit after another, and that's kind of tough to take. One of the exciting things I think about all of this is that in the face of all that, the Parking Commission has the financial wherewithal to move forward with this project, put some people to work in our community, actually build an asset that will support additional economic development. So we think that's part of the overview of what we want this parking strategic plan to provide, is not just more parking spaces, but actually some economic catalyst for your community. I think we can move on from this slide. This basically shows that there were several sites where they were focusing on some new investment in downtown and several parking structure opportunities going forward. One of the questions, though, is do we have the capital capacity within the parking authority and using other resources such as tax increment financing and other district financing options to be able to afford these parking structures. Parking structures are very expensive. On the other hand, parking can be a very effective catalyst for other development, and we've seen that in lots of communities. So it's an important part of the overall master plan to be able to support and sustain these new developments that we're hoping to see coming down the road. Our objective statement, I don't know if I can actually read this, but I will try. To implement a strategic parking and access strategy for downtown Missoula that supports the development of a vibrant, accessible, 24-hour city serving commercial, retail, recreational, and residential uses, and the customers, visitors, employees, and residents of those uses. The parking and access components of this plan need to be logical and intuitive for the user, providing easily comprehensible systems that are user-friendly, safe, secure, and well integrated into the larger transportation, access, and traffic systems of the city and region. This parking and access strategic plan should ultimately be designed to support and promote the larger community strategic direction as defined in the Greater Missoula Downtown Master Plan. There's a lot of stuff crammed into 3 paragraphs there. One of the most important things, though, is we try to get people to think differently about parking. Parking is really shouldn't be seen as divorced from the larger transportation network. It's really more about developing an integrated access strategy for downtown. Parking's not going to do it all. You need transportation systems. We don't want everybody driving a single occupant vehicle, do we? I don't. So we really trying to change the dynamic a little bit. And we also want to change the dynamic about how we think about parking. Is it just infrastructure? No, it can also be an economic catalyst for downtown. So putting parking in the category of economic development changes the way we think about parking and the way we craft our policies and procedures. Is parking the #1 reason why a retailer succeeds or fails? No, but they might think it is. A lot of times they think it is. But it is very, very important. And we think that one of the things we want to get out here is that parking needs to be very responsive to a wide variety of customers. And a lot of times those needs are almost in conflict. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do tonight is to take off your personal hat in terms of how parking impacts me personally, and think from the perspective of your parking commission, what's in the best public interest in terms of policy related to parking for our overall community. Sometimes that's a little hard to do. Now, the way we've framed this strategic plan was around a set of guiding principles. How many of you were at the guiding principles session that we had a few months ago? How many months was that?
It was more than a year, I think.
I'm afraid to even ask that question. Seems like yesterday to me. But we changed the guiding principles somewhat from that original discussion based on the feedback that we got from the group that night. We had a lot of very candid and very active conversation about that. But overall, what we want to achieve here with these guiding principles is a comprehensive approach that is strategic in nature. Sometimes parking is often very operational. We don't ever get to the strategic level, but here that's exactly what we're trying to do. We also want to develop an approach that's responsive to the needs of the community. That's what we hope to hear from you tonight, to see if this in fact is a framework that will be responsive to your needs. Because coming out of this meeting, these are just my recommendations. The Parking Commission is going to take these recommendations and start working on an action plan to move forward for the next couple of years. So that's where your input comes in tonight. Lastly, we wanted to think about this, an approach that would be aligning the parking program policies and philosophy with the larger community strategic and economic development goals. That's 3 little bullets, but there's a lot packed into those 3 bullets. I think we've pretty much said all this already. So let's get into the guiding principles. So we have basically 10 big buckets of ideas here that are trying to be the strategic framework for this whole plan. And the first principle is organization and leadership. Your system, whether you appreciate it or not, there's almost nothing for us to do here. In most communities, most municipalities have evolved into what I call a very horizontally fragmented system, where police does enforcement, public works does on-street, facilities group does off-street, finance looks at the books, and they could all be doing a fabulous job, but they're not seeing all those components as one system. They're not thinking about the relationship of the rates of on-street and how they relate to changing behaviors for off-street parking or vice versa. The guy that just bought the new system for the on-street is never going to communicate with the off-street system because he didn't even know you were buying an off-street system. That happens all the time. But you have one of these vertically integrated systems because you have a commission that has taken all that into consideration. That's great. We should stop and celebrate that just for a minute. We are suggesting that since you already have a vertically integrated model, that the key elements for you to consider are on-street parking, which you do, off-street parking, which you do, parking enforcement, which you do, but also maybe a little more aggressive focus on parking planning. And you've just done a very aggressive plan as part of this process, so you're right on target there. And parking demand management. You're actually very good in that area as well. You support Mountain Lion, you support Missoula in Motion. You do a lot of things, but there's even more opportunity for those kind of things to happen. So that's great. I think we're in great shape there. The second principle is planning, urban design, and policy development. We'd like to see an effective proactive planning function, incorporating as a primary function of your commission, integrating urban design principles as it relates to parking projects. And that basically means if you build a big parking structure, don't build an old style parking structure that deadens a whole block of your downtown with no active uses on the street level. That's not the way that progressive parking programs are working now. We want active street levels, we want other uses. We want a mixed use facility because it's more cost effective, it provides an opportunity for additional economic development. We want to see a whole set of design guidelines. That was actually a deliverable of your plan, so you've actually got that in place now. So we're already making progress on this front. The really effective parking programs in the country are doing a better job of marketing themselves, promoting themselves, celebrating their accomplishments, and doing a better job of community education. Community education in the sense of there are some things that parking can do to help you solve your problems. There are some things that parking will never solve, but some people think they will solve them. Branding your system just gives people a sense that there's a real program behind this, and it really has a lot to contribute. Cross-marketing, multiple functions, a lot of things. And I think the other thing I think we should mention here, we're going to focus on 9 primary action items by the time we get done tonight. There's probably 100+ recommendations in each of, not in each category, but overall in all of these categories. So there's lots of work for the Parking Commission to be focused on. Effective management and community collaboration. If you have a forward-thinking program that focuses on being best in class, wants to always be better. The best programs in the country are the ones that call me and want me to come help them be better. The poor programs never call me. They need the most help. But it's a characteristic of really effective programs that they keep trying to raise that bar. And you guys are in that category, as far as I'm concerned. There's a million details relative to parking management. You're doing 90% of them very well here. Integrated access and mobility management. We don't want to lose this. We think you're doing a great job here already. We think there's more opportunity to leverage this. We think this is one of the more progressive aspects of your program. Your urban design guidelines, we think, should incorporate elements of this mobility management strategy. In fact, your new Higgins Street program has bike lanes, separated bike lanes built in. Very progressive. That's very exciting. Economic development. For me, this is one of the more important elements from what we've seen in other communities. When you start thinking about parking as part of your economic development strategy, you start attaining a different level overall. And so there's a lot of things we can do here. I think the front and Patty Street garage is just the first salvo in that regard. But it also ties back to things like our parking rates, our parking fines. If you don't have money to invest, you can't have a big impact on economic development. Parking is one of those things that can generate revenue that can be reinvested strategically. A big one that will be big on our list of discussion topics tonight, I'm sure, is leveraging technology. If you look at your meters on the street, they're still pretty old-fashioned. But you're about to realize a real benefit from having held off on investing in technology. In the last 5 years, 5 years ago, if you had bought a multi-space meter for downtown, you would have had to dig up your sidewalks, put in conduit for power and communications. Now it's all solar powered and wirelessly communicated. You don't have to do that. You probably just saved $500,000 by choosing to wait a couple of years. And you're going to have a greener product to boot. That's great. But now is the time to make that investment, and there are other good reasons that we'll talk about when we get to that point. Customer service. I don't think we can ever take our eye off of this ball. How customer friendly we make downtown is a direct, I think has a direct impact on how successful our downtown is going to be. Parking enforcement is a requirement to get the turnover of those valuable on-street spaces for the benefit of our merchants. But there are ways to do that more humanely. It's always going to be negative, but there are ways to mitigate that negativity. There's a variety of ways in which we can improve customer service and responsiveness. One of those ways is if we have employee parking concerns. This just came up in the last 2 days. Employee parking became kind of an issue, a focus issue. One of the ideas we're talking about now is going out and kind of doing a workshop, a forum on employee parking issues, and setting up workshops to actually ask you your input. What is the impact to your business of employee parking? Why are your employees parking on the meters in the streets, taking up short-term customer spaces, if they are? And how can we deal with that most effectively? Do we have the assets we need? Do we have convenient, affordable employee parking so that the employees have a place to go? And those kinds of issues. So focusing on what your needs are, getting your feedback, and then being responsive to those needs is kind of the core of this issue. Sustainability. I know that Missoula is a very progressive, forward-thinking place. Sustainability initiatives are at the top of a lot of people's lists these days. And parking, believe it or not, is not necessarily the anti-green thing that some people think it is. There's a whole world of green strategies relative to parking and alternative transportation that we can embrace, and I think there's a lot of activity here that we'll want to explore. Finally, funding, fiscal responsibility, and accountability. This is essentially a quasi-public system. You have a right to expect it to be transparent and fiscally responsible. They just had an audit report presented today at the Parking Commission board meeting that was as clean an audit as I've ever seen in my life. I was really impressed. Congratulations. But I think there's still the kind of work to be done there. There's a lot of, as we move forward, there are a lot of elements that we can improve even on what we have here in terms of presenting information and educating the community and things like that. So in summary, we're going to use these guiding principles as the foundation, the strategic framework for the larger plan. The plan will be a lot of very specific action-oriented elements, and we're going to go over the 9 that I have pushed out as most prominent or most important for your consideration tonight. But the real thing here is to think of this as a process. Because we've been through 2 years of process and we've worked really hard to get to this point, doesn't mean it's the end. It's just the beginning of the real work. It's not a one-time task. So this, in summary, is your 10 guiding principles that we're going to talk about. But I'm going to pause quickly here to see if there's any questions on what we've covered before we start diving into these 9 separate primary action items. Any questions? Switch to another presentation. Surely there's got to be one question. Okay, this is just the cover of the task report number 3. The first primary action category is new parking facility planning and development. There's a lot of stuff in here. How we do the planning, where it's located, what we hope to get out of that, making sure we maximize shared parking opportunities. Do we have the financial wherewithal? Where are the funding sources for these structures? At $20,000, $15,000 to $20,000 per space, this is a real significant investment for your community. As you've heard earlier, the Front and Patty location is our primary site. There's another site down by the hospital, which was identified in the Crandall-Rambula report as probably the number 2 site. I'm just thrilled that you're actually able to move forward with this first parking structure. I think it's going to be really important for downtown. So assessing site acquisition and right-of-way issues, you're well on that path, I believe. Assess the MPC bonding capacity, that's been done. Project parking deck construction and operating costs, those assessments have been done. Assessing parking deck demand and revenue potential, I don't know if we're completely finished with that one yet, but that's something that was started. But as you can see, just from those first steps, we haven't even started construction yet. We haven't even got design yet. But there's already a lot of work that's been done. Now, the design and having some design guidelines and designing this so it fits well into the community, that it has active street level uses, that it's big enough to support not only your current needs but future needs. I mean, it's just the tip of the iceberg on the kind of issues here. There are some pictures there that kind of show what I consider to be the new design standard for parking structures. The top picture there, just any architects in the room tonight? Architects hate those slanted ramps on the side of a garage. It just looks ugly. I agree. That one actually has those slanted roofs, but we were able to mask them and make it look like windows because it fit into a historic district. That's the kind of thinking we want to bring to this. We don't want something ugly that's going to detract from our community. We want something to be proud of. The second picture is the Pearl Street Garage. It won numerous awards in Boulder. It's street level retail, office above, parking deck in the middle, wrapped completely by other uses. The 2 on the bottom, they were actually the same facility. They had bookended residential on the ends of those garages. So the community wanted more residential downtown. They were able to use this site not only for parking, but also to provide more residential, which is going to support more retail, which is going to support the larger strategic plan. So we're trying to think about parking as a catalyst for new development, but also as a platform for us to leverage other opportunities. Any questions about new facility planning and development? Anything we should be thinking about? Any advice for the Parking Commission? Okay. Okay, here's a good one. This ought to be fun. Adjusting parking rates and fines. We've got a little bit of history with this. We've been around and around on this issue a couple times. So the key issues here from my perspective are, let's see, what did we say? We reviewed the parking rate and fine history in Missoula. Interesting to note that the meter fines have not been raised in 30 years. We did a regional and peer market analysis to see how you related rate-wise and fine-wise to other communities of your size. And we wanted to put the idea of parking rates and fine increases within the context of the larger master plan. And that's important to me because at $2 for the first citation, is that right? How many of you mind paying $2? How many of you say, I'll just stay here, I'll take the ticket, $2, no big deal? Well, several of you. The fact that, and the thing that I think is important here is that if enough of you do that, those spaces aren't turning over. That has a real economic impact on the merchants of downtown. We calculated that in a little town of Fort Collins to be $2 million a year in lost revenue potential with a 5% abuse rate. Only 5%. $2 million a year in lost revenue to downtown, to the merchants of downtown, and lost sales tax revenue for downtown. They have sales tax in Fort Collins. So the context of the master plan has to do with the success of downtown. We want more retail. We want more contiguous retail. We want a retail hotspot. This kind of activity, if our fines are so low that they won't discourage the activity, we're going to continue to have that level of abuse or worse. So we need to think about this in terms of the big picture. Now there's another side. Let me put my merchant hat on for a minute. Fines, higher rates, you're going to scare my customers away. Nobody's going to want to come downtown. It's free parking at the mall, after all. And I can always get a space there. There's no parking availability problem at the mall. Well, A, you probably walk farther at the mall, really, than you do downtown. It's not really free. There's probably a 20% premium on the item you just bought. In downtown, you might have to walk around the corner, but actually your walking distance is probably shorter in reality. That's what we found. We did a study in Stuttgart, Germany, where they eliminated parking fees for an entire year. They measured the impact. No significant increase in sales, no significant increase in traffic. The only measurable impact was a loss of $2 million in parking revenue that the city had planned to reinvest in downtown. Is Missoula Stuttgart? Probably not, but we've not seen that there's a real correlation between a parking charge and necessarily driving away customers. If there's a real good product to be had, people don't mind paying for parking. But this is an issue that needs to be addressed. I think next slide. There are specific recommendations that we have presented in this report. Do we want to talk about the specific recommendations? Or do we want to not go into that level of detail? I'll leave that up to you. What do you think? No? Okay. Addressing parking fines and rates is something that needs to be addressed, in our opinion, and it's one of the 9 major action items. Keep going. Investing in new parking technology. We've already touched on this a little bit. There's been a lot of blog activity on the issue of parking kiosks. I feel very strongly that this is a real opportunity for your community to make downtown more visitor friendly because you have better payments. You don't have to have a quarter in your pocket. You can pay with credit cards, debit cards, a Grizz card even, a smart card. We can declutter our streetscape a little bit. We've got a great opportunity with the Higgins Street project to do something new and innovative there. And we've seen that without raising rates, parking systems can see an increase in parking revenues, which can then be reinvested back in downtown into things like flower baskets, ambassadors, sidewalk cleaning, a whole range of things. The technology is really there. I mentioned it's all wireless now. It's all solar powered now. It's a greener approach to things. You have multiple payment options. And all of these things, the bottom line for me is the mantra of your parking program is making downtown a more visitor-friendly place, enhancing the downtown experience, something like that. This is an opportunity to do that in a lot of effective ways and generate more revenue without necessarily raising rates.
Hey, Dennis?
Yeah.
I am going to ask if you can go back and talk about, since that's one of my issues, the fines and structure and why you recommended being soft on.
I was hoping you would.
Yeah, okay, yeah. The small fines
Let's go
on
back
the
one
first
more.
tickets and higher dollar values as the abuse increases.
Let's see.
We can't read that.
I can't read it either. Let's see.
I know what it is by heart, but you do too.
One of the things that we're proposing is an increase of on-street rates. I think that says 50 cents and proposed 50 cents. I think it was supposed to be $1, wasn't it? Yeah, from 50 cents to $1. That puts you still below most other cities and in line with a lot of the others. And to maintain free parking on Sundays, but consider charging on Saturdays. Again, I'm trying to generate more revenue to be reinvested in downtown, to go into a fund for creating new parking structures, to create a fund for a lot of different kind of downtown investments. In the garages and the off-street facilities, I'd like to see a first hour free. And then $1 per hour after that, up to a daily max. Monthly prices in garages, what are they now in? 65?
Yeah, 65 in the structure, 45 average for the other lots.
So we were suggesting going up to 75 a month. And then increase, you've got a range of in-surface lots from 35 to 50, and basically just increasing those on a relatively the same percent basis as the increase. Parking meter violations, payment violations, currently it's $2. We're in favor of keeping the first citation very low. I'm even in favor of an oops ticket, a free ticket, an educational opportunity rather than a slap on the hand. On the other hand, I'm sensitive to the fact that your system is set up to be this way. $2 is still low enough to me to almost be a warning. The major point here is, what's the real problem? The real problem is repeat offenders, long-term parkers, employees taking up what should be a short-term parking asset for customers. If I come downtown for the first time in 5 years, I'm having a great time, I happen to overstay my 2-hour limit, and I get a $25 ticket, well, I'll see you in 5 more years. But you give me a nice little well-marketed information warning, well, I don't mind that. I didn't really realize, I'm not used to parking downtown. But what we really need to focus on, so I don't want to slap the occasional violators. That's not the real problem we're trying to solve. The real problem is the repeat offenders. So that needs to start ramping up, be escalating fines, so that the more you do that, the harder the slap's going to be till you start changing your behavior. Now, if you change your behavior, there's a rotating time period, say 180 days. If you're good and you haven't got an additional citation, after 180 days, those tickets drop off and you go back to being at the base level again. You're not at next ticket, even higher. So we're trying to, on one hand, discourage the bad behavior, and when they start modifying their behavior, we want to encourage that behavior modification. Next slide. So second violation, $10. Does that seem extreme to you? If people aren't changing their behaviors at $2, will they change it at $5? Maybe it's 10. Maybe we take a stepped approach. Maybe that's a more prudent way to do this. I'm flexible. I'm not saying this is the absolute thing we have to do. Let's talk about it as a community. Let's come to some agreement. But what we really have to decide on is, let's make it effective. If $2 isn't going to change your behavior, will 5? I think 10 will change your behavior. This doesn't affect 90% of the people. This only affects the people who aren't following the rules, right? So anyway.
Could you elaborate just more? Could you say it should be tiered, it should go, at one time you said 0, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20. You didn't quite say that to this group. It goes up so that by the time you're getting the 5th or 6th ticket, you're getting a $25 ticket.
Yeah.
And so the people that are your users they can't afford $25 a ticket.
Well, that's the point. We don't want them to be able to afford $25 a ticket. Otherwise, if they can afford it, they're not going to change their behavior.
We like that.
You like what?
That's your approach.
Okay, yeah. Well, I think it makes sense. And again, I mean, if we can go back and look at the purpose of this, nobody likes to be punitive. On the other hand, we want our merchants to have every chance of success. We don't want to see people violating a very limited, very valuable resource. We want to manage that resource as effectively as possible to give our downtown the greatest possibility of success. And if we're not changing behavior with a $2 ticket, a $10 ticket might do it. And a tiered system like this, we think will have even more impact. So that's kind of what it is.
Dennis, do you find that the market kind of takes care of that? The market sort of determines what changes the behavior at what level?
Yeah, well, how many of you read any of Dr. Shoup's book, The High Cost of Free Parking? Dr. Shoup, it's a great cure for insomnia, almost as good as my parking report, according to Scott's blog. I read that, by the way. His argument is, keep raising your rates on street until you achieve a 15% vacancy. The 15% vacancy is important because if I'm driving downtown and I got holes in my shoes and I just stepped in a puddle and I see Hide and Soul, and there's a parking space right in front, I might just pull over and stop and go in there. If everything is full, I'll probably just keep on driving. So having a little bit of availability on the street makes it look like it's not all full, even if there's a whole half a parking deck around the corner that I can't see. But that's his principle. But I think the same thing applies to fines. If people can afford the fines, it's a cost of doing business, it's just a few bucks a month, they're not going to change their behavior. But there's a big, big economic impact of them not changing their behavior that we haven't quantified very well, we haven't sold that message very well, we haven't pushed it out there very well. I'm trying to push it out there right now. But there is a big economic impact there. And we need to try to address that. So we're recommending next steps public meetings to discuss rate changes and consultant recommendations. I don't expect you to adopt my recommendations just because I said them, but hopefully you'll find some rationale that makes sense behind it. But let's make sure that this is comfortable for the community. And if we need to take baby steps to get there, maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe not. I think going to $10 is the right thing to do, but that's just me. Propose modifications if required, obtain city council approval. Ann? Question?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Curious for context, can you tell us what the ratio is of, say, 1 hour meters versus 2 hour meters? What's available out there?
In Missoula?
Yeah.
We have mainly 2 hour meetings. We don't have any 1 hour meetings. We have some 30-minute zones, but they're mainly all 2 hour. And then we have 10-hour meetings further out, gradually.
So, again, the idea is let's find something that's comfortable for the community, but let's address the problem. It's been not addressed for 30 years. We need to deal with this. So, moving on. Did I cover that well enough? Anything you want to? This is the time to talk about this. So, what would you rather see, Scott? I mean, I respect your opinion. You're a merchant. You're a successful merchant downtown. You have opinions about what impacts your business. You know.
I like the recommendation for the tiered approach. As you know, when we look at the data, 90% get 4 or less tickets a year, we think a lot of times that's a mistake when you get a coffee, or we talked about how many people were in the parking commission meeting today that may have gotten a ticket for being there an extra 15 minutes or a half hour. So I really don't consider people that get 1 ticket every 3 months to be parking abusers. But if you look at that same data, you see people that get 50, 60, 70 tickets a year. And what I like about the tier is, and you recommended 3 different tiers now, 2, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. That's something I like a lot. I really like, I'm not sure this group can appreciate, I really like the OOPS ticket, the free pass ticket that Fort Collins is using from a marketing point of view, where, you know, where I know 90% of the people that get, or 60% of the people that get a ticket, they get 1 ticket a year. And instead of slapping their hand, you're saying, whoops, welcome downtown, we're taking care of you. The marketing potential for a downtown or for a business district where they don't slap your hand like that the first time, but you know it's going to tier. You know it's going to go 2, 5, 10, 15. By the 4th or 5th ticket, we're trying to cut down on that. So I don't think there's as many abusers as we may have talked about in the past, and I think the tiered approach is just, everyone in here knows that I think the tiered approach is really positive.
And the other dimension that I like about the OOPS ticket is it's not just a warning, it's an educational opportunity. You should learn from that. In Cheyenne, they call it a howdy partner. It's got a little cutesy little thing like a hitching post. They're still living in the 1800s.
Then one more thing, Dennis, too.
Yeah.
From a merchant point of view, the cost of a Birkenstock in the mall with free parking is no higher than the cost of a Birkenstock at Hyde Soul downtown. The cost of any merchandise in the mall is no higher than downtown. It's made up in volume. Where they pay for their free parking is they expect to get more customers there and pay for it, but it's not, the customer doesn't perceive a price increase because of the free parking, and that's passed over.
Well, that may be true. But there is a perception that the parking at the mall is absolutely free. It's really not free. Somebody's paying for it somewhere, everywhere. We know that much. But the Howdy Partner in Cheyenne is an educational piece as much as it is a warning. But they've also cutesied it up with a marketing spin that makes it really attractive. So, I mean, I like that approach myself. Okay, investing in new technology. Do we want to get into the whole kiosk versus single space meter thing? Does everybody understand what the options are? This will be a discussion that will be coming. There will be a lot more information here. But should we talk about what the basic operating methodologies of these new meters are?
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, there's 4 maybe basic operating systems. A multi-space meter covers maybe up to 8 meters instead of 8 single space meters in a row. There's 3 basic operating methodologies. Pay and display. You get out of your car, you walk to the meter, you pay for the amount of time you want. So you're buying time, not a space. You walk back to your car, you get a receipt, you walk back to your car, you display that receipt, pay, display, and you're good. If you paid for 2 hours, you come back after 45 minutes and you want to drive around the corner to Hyde and Soul, and you still got time on your receipt, you can still park. You don't have to pay again. So you have portability of time because you're buying time, not a space. That's option 1. Pay and display, or pay by space, I'm sorry. Every space has a number. I walk to the machine, I punch in, I'm in space 1, 2, 3, I want to pay for 2 hours. I don't have to walk back to my car. I just go on to where I want to go do my business. But you're buying space at that meter. If you leave and drive around the corner to Hyde and Soul, you have to pay again. But you don't have to walk back to your car. And with pay by space, you also can have pay by cell phone. If it's 40 below and the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour and you're sitting in your nice warm car and you pull out your cell phone and you have an account set up, you can pay for space 1, 2, 3 and then run into the store. You don't have to deal with standing outside. That's really cool. And oh, by the way, while you're having coffee, you get a text message that says, your meter's about to expire in 5 minutes. Would you like to add more time? And from within the coffee shop, you add more time. Isn't that great? I love that. There's a darker side to that, which I feel obligated to say. It doesn't have to happen this way, but it can happen this way, that while you're getting your text message saying, that you have 5 minutes, would you like to extend your time? A similar text message could go to the parking enforcement officer that says space 123 is about to expire in 5 minutes. Some places see that as a revenue enhancement strategy. I don't necessarily encourage that behavior, but pay by license plate. Anne was way ahead of her time with this pay by license plate idea that she implemented with the Mighty machine. Calgary just spent about $1 billion reinventing her system and patenting it up in Calgary, pay by license plate and zone. So you don't have to sign every space as long as you know your license plate number. You put the license plate number in, and then you just go on about your business. Most of the manufacturers I know are not real anxious to recreate that system in the US. So I'm not sure how viable that is right now with the major systems out there. But these days, you could probably talk Calais, Canada into coming down here. You're just over the border. So probably they would do it. The fourth one is single space meters, just new last year. Don't ask me why. You can pay by credit card at a single space meter on these new IPS meters. So the top of your current meters pop off, a new meter top goes in, it's all electronic, it'll accept credit card payments, it's Wi-Fi enabled, it's got a great back-end support system, you pay a monthly fee for that back-end support system, you get all the benefits of a single space meter, but you can pay by credit card, which is where that 15 to 35% bump in revenues come from. People intuitively know you have to pay, they know what a meter looks like. There's some real benefits there. I'm actually quite impressed. That's the options. So we'll be getting more into that. Yes, sir.
Can you explain where we're at now and how that would benefit us as far as
Well, I think that along the theme of trying to make downtown more visitor friendly, having more payment options, not having to have change is a great thing. People like to have credit card payment options, especially the younger community. I like getting a receipt because I always forget to put it on my expense report. So there's a business reason for that. It's a good thing. But the reality is people just expect to be able to pay by credit card. It's just something that people have an expectation for. But I think we can really sell the visitor-friendly nature of that. And as more and more communities do this, it's starting to become you're either with it or you're not. You're either Portland and Seattle and Missoula, or you're Portland, you're Missoula, Idaho Falls, and Fargo. Anyway, so I think there's real benefits to going to this. You will see a bump in revenues. It's a good investment. It's time to upgrade your meters. You can take your current meters and push them out and expand your meter zone, creating even more revenues. That's a very positive thing in my opinion. It's not just on-street technology though. Enforcement technology. The other thing that all these systems have are some real advantages in terms of efficiency. They will tell you if it's time to collect the revenue, the money from the meters. You don't have to check every meter every day and waste that manpower. It will give you a report that says you're 90% full in the money basket. Go collect this money now. It will tell you if your paper is about to run out. It'll tell you if you've got a jam in your machine. It will tell you if it's malfunctioning. There's a lot of things that it will do to help make your staff much more efficient and more effective. Better management reporting, better data for you to use. Lots and lots of advantages here. Enforcement, the second to the bottom picture there is Fort Collins, where they have mobile license plate recognition technology, where the camera digitizes your license plate. If you're in a 2-hour zone, you drive back around after 2 hours. If you were over 2 hours, it knows that. It will flag it for you. You stop and write a citation. If you've got 1 million parking tickets and it's time to be booted, it will tell you that too. If you're the mayor's car, it will tell you that too, so you can save your job. Lots of little benefits in that. Yeah.
With the new meter technology, if you went to retrofitted ones we have and went to one that accept credit cards, do they also have the capability to be programmed so that you might have one parking rate from 9 to 5 and a different one in the evening, or a different one on Saturday, or the day after Thanksgiving or whatever?
Very flexible programming of all those rate schedules. If you wanted to have a free parking day for Black Friday, great. If you wanted to have a special flat rate after a certain point in time or free parking after a certain point in time, you can do all that programming. You can put them in garages, and the bay closest to the Performing Arts Center might cost you $1 an hour, and the parking on the roof might cost you 50 cents an hour. If you put in your space number at 459, it'll give you one rate, and if you want a flat rate in the evenings, you punch it in at 501, it gives you that rate and you pay that rate. There's lots of really interesting flexibility operationally that these new systems offer. And so there's lots and lots of good reasons why.
Dennis, we've heard a rumor that there's a way for these single meters to monitor, and I don't say this in a good or bad way, but one of the ways they make money is you put in 2 hours worth, but you only stay an hour, you leave, and then something senses that you left, it zeroes out the meter, and the next person doesn't get any time. Is that for real? Is that happening, and is that one way to make extra money?
Yes, and I've heard this characterized as one of the few real benefits in life these days is to come up on a parking meter that still has time on it. And why would you want to take that away from us, you greedy SOBs? You can put sensors in the pavement that monitors whether you're there, and when you pull off, it will zero out the meter. Some have a little electric eye in the meter itself that's supposed to sense the vehicle. Those didn't work very well, and they kind of went away. It can be done. It's not an absolute normal feature. You have to pay extra for it. But it is a strategy that can be there, yeah. Okay. We really want to see you continue to support and invest in multimodal and sustainable access strategies. We think this is kind of a hallmark of the more progressive aspect of your parking program, and we love the fact that you see parking as part of the larger transportation system. We think it's very in line with the green movement, with sustainability. We think it's just the right thing to do for our planet. And we love to see things like, if you're going to promote more downtown residential, you know, having a car share program in downtown would be a great thing. Providing benefits for bikers and other transportation alternatives. You're even talking about a streetcar. That's really progressive and really thinking. Look at that bottom picture. I don't know if you can see what it is, but that's Seattle traffic. It's just a normal day in Seattle. We don't want that to be Missoula, I don't think. Okay. One of the things that came out of the public process of all of our stakeholder feedback was a sense that maybe the Missoula Parking Commission wasn't as open and transparent as you would like it to be. I personally felt like it was better than most systems that I've seen. I think their heart's in the right place. But they heard the criticism, and they're trying to respond to that. I think this meeting and other meetings to come will show that they've heard that criticism, and they're going to try hard to respond to that. I think the part of the whole downtown master planning process and the fact that they were a major investor in that process is testament to what they've learned along the way. And one thing I just want to reinforce here, and I should have mentioned it earlier, what do you think you bought for your money for that downtown master plan? What's the single most important thing you got from that? What I think you got was a shared vision for your downtown. And I can't tell you how rare it is for a community of your size to have come together around a plan like this. I have seen probably 4, 5, 6 groups. I'm kind of getting hoarse here from talking to them all day. But everybody is working on this plan. The implementation stuff is moving forward. Most of the important movers and shakers in your community are really dialed into this downtown strategic plan or master plan, and it's moving your community forward. That shared vision is so valuable that keeping that going, I think, is something we should all keep in the back of our minds and is one of the real benefits. Parking is right in the middle of all of that, so that's great. The idea that we're going to focus on economic development support strategies is critical. It changes the way we think about parking. It starts putting it into a whole new context. I think we've talked enough about this. The retail hotspot implementation, the First Interstate Bank investment in downtown, the overall downtown master plan investment, potential Karis Park modifications where we're taking parking out of the park, the building of the parking structure are all elements of that different view, the economic development perspective that I think is critical. As I mentioned earlier, we developed this whole, as far as I know, it was the first time it's ever been done, but a whole comprehensive list of recommendations to take your parking program and make it support retail. That whole retail hotspot support strategy, we think is really innovative and really important. And we think that getting retail going downtown again, while this is probably not the best economic environment to be pushing this agenda, it will come back, it will be important, and we'd really like to see you not lose focus on that as we move ahead. Parking program growth. One of the things that is going to occur over time is certain areas are going to expand, continue to evolve. The hip strip, for example. Maybe it's not today, but at some point they're going to run into parking issues, and the parking program will be there to help them deal with their issues over there so they can be even more successful. Those kinds of issues I think are important. It could be a growth in different directions. It could be, you could argue that the economic development perspective or the new technology is another way of seeing program growth. So we want to encourage and recognize the really fine work that's been done there. Again, I don't know how to say this enough. You've really, really got a really good program. Lots of communities would kill for what you've got. It's hard to get to where you are, but you're there, and I think you can go even further. So, and finally, a parking branding and marketing campaign that is also a little bit about celebrating your accomplishments, letting people know the contributions that your parking program is making and the success of your downtown. That's one thing most parking programs don't do very well. Excuse me. So there's a whole list of these. So this is 9 areas. Within the report, there's probably 150 very specific recommendations that your Parking Commission board are going to be reviewing. But this is the 9 that I chose to push out there as primary action items, because I think this is where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So now let's open it up for Q&A. Okay.
Do we have any questions?
You guys are way too quiet.
Should have brought some beer.
Good idea. Who wants to do a beer run?
The Butte girl should have brought some beer.
Uh-oh, we're being taped. We shouldn't have said that.
Dennis, can you talk a little bit about what you see in the way of prioritization and timeline? You know, what should the Parking Commission tackle first? You know, from your assessment and the public input that you've had throughout the last couple of years.
Well, I think the Higgins Street project is front and center. That's getting ready to move forward. There are parking dimensions to that that are going to need to be addressed sooner rather than later. Excuse me. So I think that's high on the agenda, which brings in with it the whole issue of on-street technology and making a decision about what operating methodology makes the most sense. And, you know, it kind of becomes the pilot program for testing out the new technology. And we could try multiple technologies. We could see what the community really favors if that's a direction you want to go. There's going to be some real tricky issues there because of the separated bike lane. Exactly where do these meters go? I've got some pictures, but I don't have them ready to show you right this second. But in Montreal, for example, they put the multi-space meters, pay-by-space meters, against the building, not on the curb face. That's interesting. Milwaukee and Ann Arbor have just recently done a really nice treatment for signing the on-street spaces, numbering them for a pay-by-space application. one of the arguments against pay-by-space is, well, we're going to declutter our streetscape by taking all the meters up, and then we're going to reclutter it by putting all these signs up. But in Ann Arbor and Milwaukee, they did a really attractive job, don't you think? Rod saw them in Milwaukee. We've got examples of that. I think when we come back, as we walk through these and we try to do a little community education, I think showing examples from all these different communities of how this has been done and trying to find examples of where they've done it with separated bike lanes would be interesting. So I think that's a major one for me. If the parking structure project goes through, the front and patio structure, if we get all those issues resolved and we start moving forward on that, I think getting our head together around design principles, design guidelines for parking structures, and start setting a standard for that, I think would be important to do. Because that's going to be a major signature project that we really want to do right. And I think there's an opportunity here to, there's a tendency to want to be conservative, and I think we need to take a longer view of things. We could build it at this level and take care of our current needs, and in 10 years down the road, when we've got additional needs, we're going to kick ourselves for not thinking a little further ahead. The question is whether we can afford that. I think we need to push that envelope and make it build it as big as we can, because every community I go to finds themselves, or find a way to create a horizontal expansion option so that if we can expand it further down the road, those kinds of things. Yeah.
I'm gonna put you on the spot.
All right.
What, of those technologies you talked about, all the technologies you talked about, what one would you recommend for our community? What do you think is the best fit?
I like pay by space because I also want to do the pay by cell phone. I think that is something that I would really appreciate, especially in this climate in the winter time. Plus, it's just really cool. I just think it's really, and I think that's where the cutting edge goes. I like it better than pay and display. I don't like walking to a meter and then walking back to my car and then walking back to again. I think that could be a real negative. People might perceive that as really just a little too much. And I used to worry about the signage issue, but having seen what they've done in Milwaukee and other places, I really don't think that's an issue anymore. And I think that's what I would do. But I also like the single space credit card meters. I think if there's significant opposition, I was really impressed with their back-end system. I'm a horrible consultant. I never give you a straight answer. I see it from 100 different angles, but pay by space is what I would do. Yes, sir.
Thanks. Just a couple comments. We had the opportunity to meet earlier today, and I guess I'm here to encourage some thought about a parking structure and programs out at the new Champion, or the new mill site development by the play ball stadium. But I also want to encourage, I spend a good part of my time in Boulder, Colorado, and I want to encourage the commission and the consultants to be thinking ahead for the opportunity to do private-public joint venture type relationships, and in particular, looking at the legal structures around the condominiumization, I guess, of these buildings where you can have private ownership of retail or office space at the same time having a public parking structure. So let's not wait until we're ready to do it. Let's maybe think ahead and try to work that out.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I strongly encourage that kind of thinking. I think that's where most communities are going, is trying to leverage public investment in parking to stimulate private investment as well. And there are opportunities to share foundation costs, stair tower costs, elevator costs, all those shared pieces of infrastructure, and make it a win-win for both parties. Give the Parking Commission more spaces to manage, but also encourage private ownership and investment, which creates taxable assets for the downtown, and encourages even more investment because we've added a public parking component and stimulates additional infill development as well. So, which are, again, more taxable assets for our downtown. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Dennis. We just initiated this last fall a pilot project of back-in diagonal parking.
Yes.
What, based on your experience, and I guess we only have really 3 different options for on-street parking: parallel, forward diagonal, or back-in diagonal. What are your thoughts about those options, and then particularly any reflections you have on the success or not in other communities of back-in diagonal parking?
I actually have become quite the, I have a lot of research on this because it's become quite a hot topic around the country. My initial reaction was when I had never heard of it. I stumbled onto it in Tucson, Arizona. I thought it was the weirdest thing I ever saw. I did it. It was okay. I thought it was kind of strange. There are some safety benefits when you're pulling out, which I kind of like. They're doing it in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. You've done it here, or they've done it in Boise. My personal preference is I think it works great, especially on a one-way street. But if you got a very wide two-way street with parallel parking on one side and back-in angled on the other, that can work very effectively. I think that's what you've got here, isn't it, Ellen? On a fairly wide street. It's an education more than anything else. People are just not used to it. But it works okay. I'm a little cautious of the applications. I'm a little more careful with it than some consultants, but it's not the end of the world, as I one time thought it might be. My first reaction was not positive, but I've read lots of traffic engineering analysis, and there are some real safety benefits. So I've slowly become a modest fan, not a super strong advocate, but I think in the right application, it's okay. So.
Dennis, there's lots of projects to do that you're recommending, the Parking Commission's recommended, and there's a real need for revenue and to do a lot of these projects. And sometimes that revenue pressure affects me as a merchant. Maybe we should look at raising the fees on meters. Maybe we shouldn't have a tiered fine program, all that kind of stuff. I look at it and I still see a lot of employees coming downtown and parking, a lot of owners coming down and parking. I walk and ride a bike most of the time. But when the price of gas went up, we all noticed, and we talked about it at the meeting today, how many people started using the bus and walking and riding a bike. And you said something like the cost of maintaining and building a space is $120 to $150 a space or some such thing. Where can we go that will encourage more of the employees and owners to use the bus, to bike more, to walk more? A lot of our spaces are still $45 a month. Where do we go?
It's an easy answer on one hand, and it's a really hard answer on the other. If you're Boulder, Colorado, right, 25 square miles surrounded by reality, they like it, they know they're different. They've invested $1 billion in transportation infrastructure. They don't want traffic, they don't want congestion, they don't want pollution. They want the most environmentally sensitive solution they can come up with. For them, this is why it's easy. They held down the supply of parking. They increased the price of parking. They have a 62% mode split compared of single occupant vehicle use coming to their downtown. They pay $700,000 a year out of parking to fund a free bus pass for every downtown employee. What else do? They do all kinds of stuff. But that idea that making parking more expensive, on one hand, addresses the issue you want, people out of single occupant vehicles riding the bus or taking alternative transportation. How does that affect you as a merchant? It's kind of touchy, right? I think it depends on your evolution relative to your investment in transportation infrastructure. You can't push people too hard to those alternatives if you don't have really good transportation infrastructure to accept the demand that you're pushing towards them. If your headways are 35, 45 minutes on a bus, it ain't going to work. People aren't going to do it. It's not convenient enough. If you've got light rail that's there every 5 minutes, that'll work. but it takes a long time to get there. Boulder has made that investment because of RTD, because of Denver, and because that's what they've prioritized. I don't think we're quite there yet in Missoula, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And maybe it's not all transit, maybe it's not the really expensive stuff, maybe it's more bike ped stuff. I look at the Higgins Street project, and I look at that, if that were to go all the way up and down Higgins and up and down Main, ultimately, and more places, that extends the reach of those parking structures because people are be more willing to walk. It's pretty, it's engaging, they're shopping, it's safe, it's clean. That is what makes a pedestrian-oriented community work very, very effectively. It makes people want to get out of their cars. We can get people to park once and then have a circulator that gets them around downtown so they don't get back in their car and drive 3 blocks over here and drive 3 more blocks over here. Eventually, I think you're on the right path. I think you're heading in that direction. It's just hard to get there overnight. And it takes a commitment. It takes merchants like you to say, this is the future we believe in, and I don't think an extra $1 an hour on the parking is going to kill me. Now, some of you might not agree with that.
I'm talking about the employee.
Oh, the employee issue.
And the owner payment, not the meter.
Oh, yeah, well, that's another big thing. You know, if the employer pays for your parking, you have no incentive to consider another alternative. There's a program called Parking Cash Out. Do you know about Parking Cash Out? The IRS actually allows employers to give up to $60 a month to employees, tax exempt, in lieu of paying for their parking. Now, you can choose to pay for parking, or you can ride your bike and put that $60 in a fund and buy yourself a sailboat, or whatever, pay for your kid's college fund or whatever. But it gets away from the idea of, let's not even think about not paying for parking for our employees. It makes them think consciously about the choice they're making. Think about this. Now, you've heard the concept of unbundled parking? This is more to do with development. So if you're going to buy a condo and it comes with 2 parking spaces and it's $500,000, well, then you buy the condo and you have 2 parking spaces and you don't get rid of a car. But if they unbundle the parking and you can buy the condo for $400,000 and pay $50,000 each for a parking space in that building, well, we're coming downtown because we want to downsize anyway, the kids are gone, maybe we don't need 2 cars. If we had a car share program and a bike rental program, maybe we don't need any cars. If we're working, and playing downtown, now, how much would I actually save? Insurance, maintenance, gas. Wow, we can go to Bahamas 3 times this summer on the money we saved on our car because we don't really need it anymore. That's a whole shift in mindset that's really kind of appealing in one sense, but we need to start putting those incentives in place and they say, oh, well, okay, that's fine for somebody buying a condo. Can we bring that down to the common man's everyday experience, the employee parker? Okay, if I buy a monthly parking pass, $65, right in? Well, I might as well drive. I paid for the parking all month. I could carpool with my buddy. Nah, I've already paid for the parking. I could telecommute, I could work at home today. Nah, I've already paid for, so I drive, I park. Now, Ann could sell you a punch card that costs a little bit more, but you only use the days that you punch. So if I can telecommute one day and I can carpool another day, that's 2 punches. It's like rollover minutes for parking. So it gives you, it kind of takes away that, might as well drive, I've already paid for it, incentive. Little things like that can have an impact. I mean, little innovations in programs can be really interesting. But I think we have to kind of start thinking in terms of, these are good things, these are the kind of policies we'd like to see from our parking program. We like this kind of thinking. We're going to encourage that. We're going to let the Parking Commission know that we value this kind of thinking. And I think that's an impact all of you can have, if you think that way.
So follow up, the last question to that is, what does it cost to build and maintain it? I mean, if we're charging $45 to
Oh, absolutely, you're subsidizing it. But think about this. You have a system that is making a profit. The holy grail of parking programs is a self-sustaining enterprise fund that takes that subsidy that you're talking about off the backs of the taxpayers. Yes, the parking structure costs $20,000 a space to build, and it costs $500 a space to maintain a year. You're not going to get that back at $45 or $65 a month rates. But when you take the on-street revenues, the meter revenues, the enforcement revenues, and you get one or two garages paid off, the debt service is gone, and you're operating in the black, as you are, you have effectively taken that burden off the back of the taxpayers, and it's a self-funding enterprise fund that's essentially being paid for by user fees of the people using the system. You're there, mostly. Now, will you be there tomorrow after you build 2 parking structures? No, you'll be back in the paying off the debt mode. But what if the return for that debt in the parking system is you've generated 100,000 more square feet of development downtown, 150 new residential condos, a new development across from the hospital, a big increase in property taxes because your property values have improved. Is that worth it then? Probably, I think so. It's that kind of thinking that goes beyond just what the impact on the parking program budget is and seeing the larger impact on the larger community. And all those people that are now living and working downtown are going to be walking up your street, shopping at your street, eating lunch at the shop around the corner. That's where you really start to see some real synergy and some real positive benefits. And that's how cities are advancing and moving forward and making some real advances. That's the real important piece here. That's the piece most people don't connect to parking. And I think that's why we're trying to characterize this as getting you to think differently about parking. Parking can have an impact way beyond what most people give it credit for, if you think this way, as opposed to just cars go in, cars go out, I collect money. You know, you parked wrong, I'm going to write you a ticket. You're my 60th ticket today. Good, I can go home now. That kind of, parking gets a bad rap because of that kind of attitude, and they deserve the bad rap. But programs that are doing the kind of stuff we're talking about now are really changing the landscape in a very positive way. So.
Dennis, I've got 2 questions. One, it's always occurred to me that if we're looking at $20,000 a space in a structure, and you've got a group of buildings around the structure, that maybe could make that pencil out, and you're talking $500 a year in maintenance costs. To me, just doing the calculations roughly, that's maybe $150 to $200 a month for the space.
Right.
Okay, and have there been any condominium projects put together where the parking commission would organize a scenario where the surrounding building owners could actually own those spaces for their properties and be willing to pay the building costs, but then own the spaces in the structure so that they would go along with their renting out their space and all that stuff? Has that concept ever been used?
Well, Beverly Hills, Beverly Hills is not anywhere else in the universe. Beverly Hills is kind of unique, but they can build underground parking, which is probably not $20,000 a space, probably $80,000 a space in Beverly Hills. The rent they get for the air rights above that pays for the underground parking. Now, that's Beverly Hills, it's not Missoula. Boise has a 6-level parking structure sitting right next to a big hole. Developer came in with a plan for a 30-story tower. It's going to be the tallest building in Idaho. They dug down, they've got the site prepared, they've started putting the infrastructure in place. Developer went bankrupt. There are bumper stickers around Boise that says, "Fill Boise's hole." It's been sitting there for way too long. A developer is interested in filling the hole, and what they want is to buy the parking deck adjacent to that So they don't have to, they can save money by not building their own parking if they can buy this above-grade parking right next door that is owned by the Parking Capital City Development Corp. They're looking at trading that asset to stimulate that investment, to fill that hole, and then the developer would build an above-grade site for them in another area of town where they're trying to stimulate additional development. I hear that kind of talk, but not, and people are selling parking spaces in Boston for $250,000 a space. That's Boston. So there is some condominiumization going on, but not exactly what I heard you describe. I've never quite heard that one.
The second question I have comes from a meeting that we had before we even started the master plan process, so it's been more than 2 years ago. And maybe it initially sounds frivolous, but what the comment was to take and make a lottery type system for the parking, so that every 1,000th parker that plugged a meter won $100. And I'm wondering, as a promotional, we laughed about it, but it kind of has stuck in my mind as potentially some way to take away the stigma. I mean, people like to play the gambling and all that stuff. Has anybody, and now with these, the technology that you're talking about with the meters, have you heard of anybody trying to do something like that?
Well, I actually proposed that in Vegas, they were looking at new meters, that they make it look like a little slot machine with a handle, and if you pulled it, you could have that same effect. They didn't buy it. But I've not heard that, but there are things out there. In Boulder again, their ambassadors, they had to change the law to make this legal. But their ambassadors are empowered if they see a meter about to expire and they think it was a customer shopping downtown, they put a quarter in the meter and they put a little card on the dash, on the windshield that says, your meter was about to expire, we gave you 15 more minutes, we hope it was enough, thanks for shopping downtown. It's not quite $100 windfall, but it's, you gotta feel good even if you got the ticket that somebody tried. They had a little windshield thing that's essentially a downtown shopping spree. Win a $150 downtown shopping spree. If your number is selected, we will, check our website. If your number is selected, we'll post it every week, and you can win a $150 downtown shopping spree. So stuff like that is out there. I haven't seen meters spitting $100 bills out or anything like that, but that'd make me feel happy. Even just winning free parking for the day would be kind of nice. But I like that kind of thinking, actually. So, yes, sir.
So you said early in your talk that when you did your studies of the parking in downtown Missoula, that you kind of came up with 1,500 vacant or something like that out of the 5,000 spots. I might have the numbers a little off.
Yep.
And I guess it's kind of a two-part question. The first part is, if we look at our parking as a system for downtown, what kind of a rate would you want to see as a vacancy rate? What's desirable? And you said afterwards right away, well, we probably have enough parking, but it's not in the right place.
Right.
And so the second part is, if we have enough and the vacancy rate is reasonable, are there technological solutions for reallocating people appropriately? And I guess I'm trying to get at the question of the gentleman in front of me a little bit too, that it seems like a lot of the problem is that we want to have close parking for people in retail, and a lot of the folks who are commuting to work or whatever are clogging up those spaces. And is there a way that we can, are there clever technological solutions for getting people into the right place? What's at the cutting edge of doing that?
Okay. Well, it's very typical that if you count all the spaces in a study area, that the overall number is always more than the demand. But does that mean that there's not parking problems? No, because usually it's out at the periphery where people don't really need to be or want to be. And they're often very common to have, and that's why we broke it down by zone and by block. Because by zone, there were some areas that were much better utilized In other words, the ideal, the design, what do we call it? The design day factor is usually 85%. We try to design for that level of utilization. So there's always hotspots. If somebody wants to come in, there's 20,000 square feet, I heard today, in the new Interstate Bank building that they're having trouble leasing because whoever comes in and wants 20,000 feet is going to want 50, 75 parking spaces. And if you go ask, do we have 75 parking spaces within walking distance of this building? The answer is probably no right now. Of course, that's why we want to build this other project over there. So there are local issues relative to supply and demand that you're always going to have some of that. I think you're addressing those issues. The technology question, the most innovative thing I've heard recently, has anybody heard of Parking Karma? Parking Karma, San Francisco, a company that did a web-based parking reservation system for the park and rides that serve the BART train that takes you to downtown, for commuters going to downtown. If you planned your whole day to drive to the park and ride lot to get on the train and ride the train downtown to work, and you get there and the lot is completely full, that kind of ruins your whole day. Your whole plan's messed up. So they said, I bet people would be willing to pay a little bit more of a premium if they could guarantee and reserve a space. They've been doing that successfully for 5 years. The innovation that gets closest to what you're talking about is, my new firm, Kimley Horn, just did a study in Asheville, North Carolina, sponsored by the city. They thought their public parking supply was getting close to full. In fact, the public parking system was 85 to 90% utilized. Yes, you're getting close. Yes, you should start thinking about building a new garage. Do you have enough money to do that? No. Well, we noticed something interesting. The public supply, the public system was 20% of the total parking spaces downtown. The 80% of the private supply was only 50% utilized. So our firm and this Parking Karma firm and a local parking operator proposed to do a sort of web-based open table kind of a thing, AshevilleOpenParking.com, where we would go to all these private owners of private parking facilities, say, you've got excess supply, how much could you be willing to allocate us if we could sell those spaces, market those spaces and sell them for you? And we would share the revenue. For a tenth of the cost of building that garage, we were going to try and build this marketing platform to push this out there. So you would go online, you'd say, I'm going to go to the Regency Theater, I want to go to dinner right here, what parking is available. It would show you all the parking available. You could choose the most convenient and pay that price, or you could park 2 blocks away and pay a lesser price. Reserve the space online, print out your little boarding pass and stick it on your dash. It's barcode readable. And we're taking advantage of the fact that we overbuild parking anyway. It might work for peak demands, but in off hours, we've got all this excess supply sitting around. If we could find a way to better utilize that without having to build a whole new structure, that's pretty cool. Hasn't happened yet, but that's the closest thing I've come to get to the kind of what you were talking about. It's becoming more and more possible all the time. So.
Dennis, remind me on the data for what's being used for parking, how full it is. It seemed like a lot of our parking spaces also were in private, and that all the hotspot parking was pretty full. Circle down by the farmer's market was very full for some reason. Sometimes it exceeded 100% capacity. I assume that's people parking in yellow zones.
Parking illegally, right?
Yeah. So are we as full as the data that I looked at seem? And was that just one day of data? I remember seeing 1 day of data for all the data we're talking about.
We did 3 days, I believe, and what we focused on in the report was the peak day, because that was what we were most concerned about. So what we're trying to focus on what was the peak demand period, and then kind of make our judgments on supply based on that peak demand. If we base everything on average, then when you have a peak day, you're kind of in trouble because you weren't really ready for that. Now, Shoup would argue, and Todd Lippman would argue, that it's exactly that thinking that has caused us to overbuild our parking supply in most of our cities, and that's why we have this too much parking, and it's too easy to drive, and we really should be thinking more about other transportation modes and trying to manage the demand more than just keep building more and more supply. But I think you've just got localized hotspots, just like every other place. There are places where you've got not enough supply for the demand, and you've got places where you got more supply than you do demand. So it's a mix. Yes, Alan?
If we've got a situation where we've got excess parking, but it's not necessarily where it needs to be to serve the retail sector or whatever, are we at a point where we should be looking at using some of that underutilized parking in a different manner, say more 10-hour meters, because those seem to be pretty popular with employees, and it's a real dogfight to get one in the mornings. Are those some of the, I mean, we have the data that shows where we're underserved and also underutilized. Do we have enough information to start looking at converting some of those to a different method of parking?
Let me tell you the story of Lincoln, Nebraska. Lincoln, Nebraska has they've got more parking structures than you do, probably 5 or 6 public parking structures. They have a good system. They do the on-street just like you do. But they had 200,000 square feet of office in their downtown that they just couldn't lease, because every time somebody was interested and they came to talk to the people downtown and they asked the P question, well, you're going to have to talk to the city about that. They run the system. And the standard answer from the city was, oh, we've got a waiting list for monthly parking of 400 spaces. We'll be happy to put you on our waiting list. Well, when we looked at it, we didn't really understand that. We drove in the parking garages. We saw 2 levels almost empty, but they've got a 400 space waiting list. All right, well, let's look at the rates. All the downtown parking structures with the same rate. That's interesting. They just built 2 new garages over here, about 2 blocks out of the core, that were sitting at about 45% occupancy and 65% occupancy. So, and then we said, well, tell us about your diversity factor, your oversell factor for monthly parking. They weren't overselling their monthly parking. That's sin number 1 if you're a private parking management firm. So what we said was, what you need in this particular case, and I'm not sure it's exactly the same for Missoula, but what they needed was an application of basic management and economic principles. Raise the price a little bit in the core, lower the price out here in these 2 new garages that are only 2 blocks away, try to draw the price-sensitive customers out, and oversell your monthly supply. You can oversell that by 25% usually. Start slow, inch it up 5% at a time. Don't make a big mistake there. But you can get it depending on, because not everybody always goes to work every single day, even if they have a monthly parking pass. So we know we can oversell. 15% is very conservative, 25% is probably reasonable, 35% might be pushing it. But, so we had them do all those things. Guess what? The 400 space waiting list went away completely, and they had excess supply, and in 6 months, they had leased out the entire 200,000 square feet. They probably had an additional 200 people working downtown. And the economic impact was tremendous. It's just applying basic management principles. Now, I haven't seen that kind of lack of management principles here. But I mean, that's the kind of question you're asking. Is that something we need to look at? Never hurts to look at it. Now, maybe the parking commission can go to people who aren't managing their lots very effectively and say, can we help you manage this more effectively? We'll share the revenue with you. Any increase in revenue over what you're getting now? I don't know. Have you tried that? So there's all that stuff I think is fair game to look at, though, certainly.
For anybody that doesn't know, I was in Las Vegas at a shoe show and I flew back for the meeting, so I'm asking a couple extra questions here. Dennis, we talked about First Interstate. Okay. We talked about First Interstate Bank and having 20,000 square feet, no parking. I don't know what the percentage of towns require that new develop, I don't know if there's any developers in here, but they require that when you build a building, you build the parking, and you really get them to think about it. What would be your strategy? Can we pass laws, zoning laws, whatever, in Missoula, Montana, about development where they have to put in parking? How easy is that? What's your view on that?
Oh, that's a big question. You currently have a 0 parking requirement in your downtown district as a way of encouraging development. But what that means to me is that the city is taking responsibility for parking development. If they're not doing it, who is? A lot of times the developer will not build it without building their own parking because their bank won't lend them the money. This asset's no good if I don't have parking to support it. I'm not sure how that plays into this particular question. But it would be a question of, do we want to go back to requiring minimum parking requirements for any development in downtown? That's an option. The more progressive option is not parking minimums, but parking maximums. You can only build this much parking. We don't want you to build any more because we don't want to see that much additional parking because we want more of our people to take public transportation. That's another side of the equation. Calgary has a fee in lieu program. They have a calculation that developers will say, I'm coming in with this development with X amount of land uses and these quantities of these land uses. And they say, our formula says you're creating a parking demand of 800 spaces. And in Calgary, they have to build 400 spaces, and they have to contribute the other 50% into a fee in lieu fund that the city or the parking program manages to strategically build public parking assets in the downtown. And in Calgary's case, it's $35,000 per space. Is that encouraging development? Would that work here? I kind of doubt it. You kind of have to have a lot of demand to make that program work. I don't know the real answer to that one. It's a touchy question. It's being debated all over the country right now. But those are the basic options. Ellen probably answered it better than I can.
I'm not sure I can answer it, but I want to put on my urban design hat and say that the last thing you want to encourage in downtown, in maturing or mature downtowns, is surface parking lots.
Absolutely.
And until the economics of the private sector building structured parking to go along with development downtown, to have zoning require off-street parking for new investment downtown would be absolutely a death knell for new investment down here. You know, our hope is that by building parking structures in downtown, the value of these surface lots that we've got scattershotted all over, particularly north of Broadway, the land values will become so high, too high to have surface lots, and we'll start to see infill development, which is then where we're going to get our residential base down here. So from an urban design standpoint, until the economy will support structured parking, I don't think we ever want to require the private sector to have to build parking downtown in order to build down here.
And I think that's sort of what I've seen in most communities around the country right now. The fact is, I mean, if parking facilities would pay for themselves, you'd have private developers lining up to build them. But that ain't the case. That's why most municipalities subsidize public parking. But again, San Francisco, it pays for itself, absolutely. At an airport, it pays for itself. But think about this. You're not in that business of necessarily subsidizing. You've got a system that's actually paying its own way. It's only making a few $100,000 a year in profit. But over years, you've built up a $4 or $5 million reserve that's starting the investment in this new Patty Street garage. I mean, you should be proud of what you've got here. You should be really pleased that you're not where most cities are. You've really got a much better program here than I think you give yourselves credit for.
And as we're wrapping up, because we're getting close to our end time, I didn't know if Rod the chairman of their board of directors, wanted to talk a little bit about where all this information is going to be going now forward, and then also the future relationship with Dennis. I think it's real interesting to know that his involvement is going to continue.
I think we decided that if people have questions or input on an ongoing basis, that we're going to work it like we have with the BID, and you can send comments to me at info@MissoulaDowntownBID.org. And it's on the bottom of your sheet. Or call the BID and we'll get it to you. I will probably not be able to answer questions myself, but we'll get them to where they need to be.
Also, that these documents are online.
That's correct. Task report 1, 2, and 3 are on the BID website, along with the rest of the master plan. So, and the more input, the better. I think some of this will get channeled through the parking advisory committee that we've formed. They'll have a chance to deal with it, mull over whatever suggestions come from the public itself, and then make suggestions for the parking commission to act on or utilize in making their decisions. Thank you.
All righty. Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. Dennis, unless you have any closing comments, we just want to thank Ann and all of the work that the Parking Commission has done in not only contributing the information and working so hard with you so that everything folds in very nicely and is integrated with our master plan, but also for your hospitality tonight and having this open forum. I think it's real important to continue this type of discussion, especially in a community like Missoula. We like this kind of conversation. So with that in mind, thank you, everyone, for attending. Please leave your blue forms behind or drop them off at the door there. And Dennis, I'll turn it over to you for your final comments.
I'll just say, any last questions? One more chance. Thank you very much for your very thought-provoking questions. It's always it's a challenge. I mean, you guys do smart stuff here. You ask really good questions. I hope that the direction that we're pushing you in sounds reasonable, looks comprehensive and strategic to you, and that we have an open enough forum that we can engage in whatever issues you've got. I think there's a real willingness to do that. I think we're smarter as a group than we are as a bunch of individuals, so the more communication we have together, the better. Thank you very much.